Tsavo East, early afternoon. The sun hung sharp and dry above the scrubland, pulling heat from every surface. A faint shimmer rippled across the soil, but just beyond the brittle brush, the outline of a massive shape broke the uniform line of dust. A ranger patrol moved in slowly, stopping at a safe distance. An elephant lay motionless on her side, not sleeping, not resting. Her skin, streaked with dried mud and patches of clay, rose and fell in uneven rhythm. The call came through from Daniel, the youngest of the team, his voice even but cautious. "She's in labor, but not moving." David, the lead ranger, moved forward a few paces, squinting against the glare. She was breathing, just enough to stay conscious, but her ears barely flinched at the sound of approaching boots. Her flank trembled, muscles tightening and then releasing in long, delayed waves. From this distance, it was clear she had been like this for some time. The dust beneath her was disturbed, damp, collapsed into small craters from hours of shifting weight. David signaled the others to stay back. He approached on foot, slow and measured. There were no signs of a herd nearby. No tracks, no dung, no scent trails. She was entirely alone, a rare and dangerous state for a mother this close to birth. One wrong movement, one surge of pain, could cause her to react defensively. He stopped a few meters away and lowered himself into a crouch. She didn't lift her head. Her eyes were open, glassy but alert, following nothing. The wind shifted briefly, carrying the scent of blood. Fresh, not from a wound, but from the birthing process. It meant the calf was close, or already trying to come. Yet something was wrong. The swelling across her back legs looked uneven. Her breathing was too shallow. Her body seemed to be holding itself back as though the natural rhythm of delivery had stalled. A pause that had gone on too long. David radioed in coordinates and requested backup. "Heavy female, isolated, early labor signs, maybe obstructed. We'll need veterinary assessment." He glanced toward her again. She had moved slightly, her trunk curling inward, then dropping again. Her back legs shifted, only an inch, then froze. The signs were clear. She couldn't rise. And without intervention, she wouldn't be able to protect the calf, let alone survive the delivery. Minutes passed, then longer. They kept their distance, watching. A few guinea fowl moved through the brush, scratching nervously before hurrying on. Flies gathered at the base of the elephant's tail, drawn to the scent of fluid and warmth. She flinched once, a full-body shudder that ended as quickly as it began. Her mouth opened slightly and a sound escaped. Not a trumpet, not a scream, just a long, low rumble, deep and broken. David stood again, brushing dirt from his knee. He knew the reality. If she couldn't deliver soon, both animals would die. If the calf was stuck, there was a little chance of movement without assistance. And if any predator caught scent of this stillness, it wouldn't take long before they arrived. There was no shade, no cover, no protection. The risk was immediate and absolute. The others waited in silence, glancing between the mother and the tree line. Dust curled across the ground like thin smoke. She was losing strength fast. He watched her eye blink once, slowly. The breath from her trunk was weaker now, pulsing in slower waves. He whispered gently, barely audible, "Just hold on, girl." The only reply was wind sliding through dry grass and the steady, trembling rise of her ribcage. The air did not shift. The light above Tsavo remained flat and blinding, pressing heat down over the open scrub. The elephant's sides moved in smaller intervals now, her chest rising only slightly with each breath. Her legs, once twitching in slow response to pressure, now lay completely still. The dust beneath her had begun to cake and crack. It held the imprint of her body like a mold, the shape of her ribs, the weight of her head, the lines her trunk had traced and abandoned. David stayed seated a short distance away. He had radioed for assistance an hour ago, and again 30 minutes later. There had been no reply beyond confirmation. The veterinary team was on their way, but the terrain was slow, and the truck would not arrive quickly enough. Behind him, the rest of the rangers kept their positions in the brush, shaded slightly by thorn branches. None of them spoke. The only sound was the soft, repetitive hum of insects rising and falling around the silent body in front of them. Flies had begun to settle across her eyes and the base of her tail. She no longer flinched when they landed. A dark line of moisture trailed from the birth canal, thick and unmoving. There was no sign of movement from within. No kicking, no shift. The calf might still be alive, or not. The longer it remained inside, the greater the risk, to both. David watched her face for any signal. Her left ear moved once, slow and limp, brushing the ground before stilling again. Her trunk had curled slightly inward, the tip resting near her mouth, but she hadn't used it. It lay in the dust like a rope, limp and motionless. There was no alertness left in her posture, just survival. He stood, slowly, adjusting the radio strapped across his shoulder. The call came back again, 20 minutes out, maybe more. He looked up briefly at the sun. Still high, still searing. Time was not on their side. What he feared most now was what they couldn't see. If the calf had shifted into a position that blocked the birth canal, her body might have shut down the labor response altogether. That could mean internal rupture, septic shock, a slow death that would take them both. And yet, touching her, moving her, without assistance could provoke panic. Or worse, rupture something already torn. Intervention without precision would almost guarantee failure. She exhaled again, slower this time. A long stream of air that left her lungs in a shudder. Her eyes remained half-closed, her lashes clumped together with dried fluid. Still no movement from within. He crouched again, near her shoulder, far enough to remain non-threatening. "You're not done yet," he said quietly, not expecting her to respond. The words were not for her comprehension. They were a way of marking time, a ritual of waiting. Behind him, a bird called once, sharply. Then silence returned. The team stayed back, watching. One ranger adjusted his stance, shifting weight to the other leg. That was all. David didn't move again, not until the sound of an engine touched the edge of the horizon. Distant, faint, but real. The vet team was near. Not here, but coming. He exhaled slowly and watched the elephant's body for any change. None came. No lift of her head. No shift of her legs. No sound, only a breath, faint as dust, and the unbearable stillness of waiting. The calf slid free just before midday, a quiet motion, almost unnoticed. No convulsion marked the moment, no final effort or call. Just a soft release, a shift in weight, and then stillness. The newborn lay curled beside her, coated in afterbirth and dust, its skin slick and thin like wet parchment stretched over a trembling shape. There was no cry, no instinctive gasp for breath, just silence. David saw the movement first, a twitch in the folds near the mother's rear flank and then the unmistakable glisten of something new on the earth. He didn't rise. He only leaned forward slightly, squinting to make sense of what he saw. The team behind him remained still. Not a single voice broke the quiet. The mother didn't react. Her body remained slack, eyes unfocused, trunk still resting across the parched ground. Her ears did not flick, her head did not rise. If she knew what had happened, it did not show. The calf made no attempt to lift its head. One leg moved, barely, a faint ripple beneath the fragile skin along its shoulder. That was all. Its breathing was shallow. The ribs did not rise in full motion, only quick flutters, irregular and small. It did not yet know the air. David waited quickly. The calf was out, but weak, extremely so. If the mother didn't wake, didn't acknowledge, the calf would not stand. And if it did not stand, it would not nurse. Without nursing, Its chances dropped to minutes, not hours. He turned slightly, whispered a signal over the radio. The vet team was 5 minutes out. Maybe less. It would be too long if either collapsed entirely. He looked again. The calf's front legs straightened. A small effort. Its head lifted slightly but dropped again without control. The mother gave no sign. David knew the risk of approaching. Even now, with her unresponsive, she could react. Mothers have turned aggressive in seconds. Instinct triggered without warning. He had seen it. Felt it once, too, a charge that stopped only when a second ranger intervened. The situation was worse. She was injured, fatigued, possibly in shock. A sudden movement could endanger all three of them. Still, the calf was dying in front of them. Slowly, quietly, without protest, he rose to his knees and moved a few steps forward, then paused. One hand raised slightly, open, not as a signal, just habit. His eyes locked on the mother's face. Still no reaction. 2 more steps. The calf's ears twitched. A faint sound escaped its mouth, not a cry, just breath moving past fluid. David stopped again, now only 3 meters from the newborn. He crouched low, not touching, only observing. A minute passed. Then, the mother's trunk shifted. Barely. It lifted 1/2 inch off the earth, then fell again. Her eye closed fully, then opened. She had seen him. He whispered again, almost a breath. "It's all right." The wind moved through the brush behind them. Nothing else stirred. The calf tried once more to move, its rear limbs stretching slightly outward. It did not rise. David stayed still, crouched low, the space between them tight with risk. If she rose in panic, she might step on the calf. If he reached out, she might charge. But if no one acted, the calf's breathing might stop altogether. The mother blinked again. Her trunk moved a few inches, slowly curling in a new direction. Toward the calf. It was not trust, not yet, but it was recognition, and for the first time in hours the balance shifted, faintly but visibly, toward life. David moved slowly, the dry air tight around his chest, every breath filled with dust and distance. The mother's eyes were open now, not wide, not alert, just open. That small shift alone had changed the space between them. The calf had not risen. Its head remained heavy against the earth, its body still curled. Its breathing came in short, wet rasps, interrupted by quiet pauses that lasted a little too long. David couldn't wait any longer. He crouched near the newborn, inching forward on knees. The flies were thick around its face, drawn to the mucus and blood. One landed near the calf's eye. David brushed it gently away. Then another. His hand moved slowly, rhythmically, no sudden motion. The calf barely stirred. He reached for a soft cloth from his belt pouch and dampened it with water from a metal canteen. With delicate strokes, he cleared the calf's trunk, careful not to block the airflow. Thin, milky fluid seeped from one nostril. David wiped it, then supported the tip of the trunk between his fingers, letting it rest there a moment. The weight was almost nothing, but it pulsed with faint warmth. Behind him, the mother remained grounded, still lying on her side. Her flank rose and fell. Shallow, slow. Her ear flicked once, brushing the dust from her cheek. Then, for the first time, she moved her trunk. Not toward the calf, not toward the ground, but toward David. It came without rush, a quiet, uncertain arc through the dry air, and rested softly against his right shoulder. He froze. The touch was not firm, not probing, just placement. A question, maybe, or recognition. The pressure increased slightly, then moved down his arm. She held it there. He whispered, more breath than sound. "You're all right. I'm just helping." There was no clear signal to proceed. But the moment had shifted, and in that pause, David leaned down and cupped the calf's shoulder gently, checking for tension, life, response. There was a tremble, The legs moved again, just enough to suggest the instinct was still present, the will to rise, though not the strength. The vet team was still minutes out. David worked slowly, clearing the calf's eyes, then lifting its front limb to check for fracture or stiffness. There was resistance, but no dislocation, no swelling, only weakness. The mother's trunk moved again, this time curling back toward her own chest. She didn't lift her head, but she watched. This was the narrowest window. Any noise, any panic, and all of it could shift back toward danger. If the calf collapsed fully again, or the mother attempted to rise too quickly, the situation would spiral. David pulled his scarf from around his neck, folded it twice, and placed it gently beneath the calf's jaw to keep its airway unobstructed. It let out a sound, wet, brief, almost like a cough. But it was something, a vocal effort. The mother shifted again. A foot moved, stirring a small patch of dust. Her tail flicked weakly once. If they could keep the calf breathing for 10 more minutes, if the mother didn't panic, if her vitals didn't crash, they had a chance. But nothing was stable yet. Every second pressed against the edge. The calf tried to lift its head again. This time, it succeeded. Only for 3 seconds, but it held. David did not smile. He didn't speak. He only placed a steadying hand on its flank and waited. A wind passed through the scrub brush nearby, dry leaves clicking against one another. The sun remained high, pale in the hazy sky. For a moment there were no sounds at all, only breath, dust, and a fragile trust holding everything still. The stillness held for longer than anyone expected. Dust lifted in faint spirals across the plain, but the heat had softened now, blunted by the shift in the sun's position. David remained low beside the calf, his hands steady, eyes scanning between mother and horizon. The rangers kept their distance, positioned wide in a loose semicircle, boots pressed into dry earth, radios silent. Then came the vibration. Faint, almost imagined at first. A subtle rhythm in the soles of their boots, not yet sound but presence. David's eyes lifted. The calf stirred. The mother blinked. From the northern ridge, where the heat shimmered and grass sat brittle beneath scattered trees, came a low rumble. No trumpets, no dust storm, just a slow, quiet approach. Shadows moved along the edge of the dry horizon, large, deliberate figures closing the space without urgency. A small herd, maybe 6 or 7, emerged into view. They moved in near-perfect silence, ears relaxed, trunks low. One matriarch led, older, marked by torn ear and pale streaks along her flank from dried mud. They didn't charge, they didn't call, they simply came, and the space changed around them. The herd didn't pause to assess. They already knew. The matriarch reached the edge of the open space where the mother lay and stood still, her body angled slightly toward the calf. One by one, the others fanned out around them, careful but confident, forming a slow-moving perimeter. The youngest stayed back. The oldest closed the circle. It wasn't protection in the human sense, but an instinctive encircling, body to body, presence as reassurance. The mother, still down, lifted her trunk and gently reached toward the nearest flank. Her touch landed softly, brushed once, and retreated. The calf tried again to move its front legs. They buckled but didn't collapse. David drew back slowly, inch by inch, never rising to full height, his eyes never leaving the matriarch. Her gaze passed over him once, indifferent, measured, but she did not stop him. The moment was delicate. If the herd felt threatened, the calf could be trampled in confusion. If the mother attempted to stand too fast, she might injure herself or the newborn further. Nothing was certain yet. Every breath still held risk. The mother shifted, her rear leg twitching slightly. Her breath had grown more rhythmic now, less panicked, more deliberate. One of the females near the outer edge exhaled through her trunk, a low, soft sigh that rippled outward. A few birds startled from the brush, flapping briefly before settling again. The vet team, now parked just beyond the rise, remained out of view, waiting for David's signal. But for now, there was no need. The herd had taken position. Whatever came next would be on their terms. The calf lifted its head a second time, this time longer. Its eyes fluttered, then opened more fully. One foreleg tucked in, the other pushed weakly forward. Not enough for balance, but enough to try. The herd did not intervene, did not crowd. They remained still, watching, breathing, offering presence. David, now crouched beside the dry scrub, radioed in quietly. "Hold position. Herd's here." No one replied. There was no need. The response was already playing out. In the quiet of late afternoon, with the wind just beginning to shift across the plain, the tension softened. The risk hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, wrapped now in something older, heavier, unspoken. And as the sun leaned west, brushing golden light across the wide, open ground, the wall of elephants remained, firm, still, and utterly silent. The air, once still and heavy, shifted again, but not with wind. A soft thud broke the quiet as one of the elder elephants dropped suddenly to her knees beside the calf. The ground didn't tremble with her fall. It sank. Her body curved slightly as she leaned forward, chest low to the dirt, trunk resting flat, unmoving for several seconds. The others paused, watching. Her ears twitched weakly. A dark stain had begun to spread along her right flank. Just behind the shoulder, jagged, torn, and already thick with dried blood. David saw it at the same moment one of the rangers whispered her name over the radio, barely audible. She had carried it with her, this wound, not new, not fresh, but reopened by distance, by duty. Her ribs expanded unevenly with each breath. The calf, still trembling where it lay, made a shallow movement toward her, its head nudging weakly in her direction. She didn't respond, not with noise, not with touch. But her presence had changed everything. The mother, who had collapsed hours before, now stirred again. Her eyes blinked with slow awareness. Her trunk lifted, searching, not far, just inches. Enough to recognize what had changed, enough to feel the nearness of death. David lowered his binoculars, stepping forward slowly but staying just outside the circle of bodies. The herd did not retreat. They adjusted slightly, as if shifting their breath in synchrony. There was no panic, no aggression, only the quiet rearrangement of roles none of them had spoken aloud. The matriarch, her breathing now audible in low gasps, remained grounded, her head tilted, not from pain, but from focus. It became clear, piece by piece, the calf was not hers. She had led them here, wounded, fading, because she had one task left. The mother, isolated and failing, had been found. How or when, no one could say. But this elder had taken the final distance upon herself. The calf's survival had become her last act. She had brought the herd not to claim the newborn, but to deliver it. The implications were immediate. If the matriarch collapsed fully, the herd's structure would falter. Leadership shifts slowly in elephant societies. Decisions delay. Without her, protective instincts might override calm. The calf, still too weak to stand, remained vulnerable not just to the elements, but to the delicate social balance now unraveling. David moved another pace forward, whispering for the vet to stay ready. A misstep now, even in compassion, could unravel the stillness. The calf's trunk lifted slightly and brushed the earth. No sound, no cry. But when its forehead pressed lightly against the matriarch's leg, the older female moved, just once. A small shift, an acknowledgement, and then her head lowered fully, resting sideways in the dust. Her body stopped rising with breath. The rest of the herd stood motionless. No rumbles. No trumpets. No tension in their limbs. Only the weight of what had been witnessed. David dropped to one knee near the perimeter. "She brought her here," he said quietly. One of the younger rangers nodded, not looking away. There was no protocol for this, no training for the grief of animals. But it was clear enough in the stillness, in the way the others made space, not retreating, but adjusting again, as if absorbing the loss into their shape. The calf blinked slowly. Its eyes opened fully for the first time, and beneath the lowering sun, with the wind beginning to shift the dry grass beyond the plain, the mother leaned closer. Her trunk extended, hovering, then made contact, first with the calf's back, then with the matriarch's silent shoulder. A touch shared between what remained. No words, no thought, only weight and warmth, and the faint rustle of distant trees. The silence held for longer than anyone expected, a kind of silence that carried weight, as if the landscape itself was unwilling to speak until something sacred had passed. Minutes stretched, slow and thick, with only the dry whisper of the wind brushing across the low grass and the lazy circle of flies rising in spirals above the baked earth. The elder's body, now stilled by the final breath she had given hours before, remained where she had fallen, her great mass folded into the plain as though returning to it. Nothing about her presence demanded attention. It simply existed, a hushed monument to endurance. Yet the stillness wasn't hollow. It wasn't without tension. Something in the air had begun to change. Not a roar, not a movement that could be traced with the eye, but a shift felt just beneath the skin. It was like the first tremor before a storm. The mother, the one whose own collapse had marked the beginning of this strange, fragile gathering, stirred. It wasn't dramatic. There was no rush to rise, no gasping return. It began with the smallest flicker, one eyelid pressing briefly against the harsh slant of the sun, then a trembling along her midsection, like the ripple of wind through loose fabric. Her trunk, which had hung lifeless beside her jaw only moments earlier, began to shift, dragging in the dust with a whispering sound until it came to rest against the side of the calf, lying barely breathing beside her. There was no force in it, no urgency, just motion driven by something old and patient inside her. Slowly, her shoulder lifted, awkward and stiff. Her ribcage followed, straining against her own weight. Her legs, folded beneath her in positions not meant for long stillness, pushed awkwardly against the earth as though unsure whether they could still carry her. Every inch forward demanded something from her, something physical, yes, but also something else, the decision to try again. Inside, she was still torn, her muscles weakened from the effort of birth, her energy frayed by pain and the long, uncertain wait for her newborn to show signs of life. The risk hadn't passed. Rising too quickly could drop her again, but she moved anyway, and that, quietly, meant everything. The calf, whose breathing had remained faint and whose limbs had barely twitched since its entry into this vast world, seemed to register her presence. His head shifted an inch. His eyes blinked once, slow and unfocused. His trunk curled inward for the briefest second and touched her knee, not in awareness, not in greeting, but in some instinctive pull toward what had made him. The mother lowered herself carefully beside him again, her head swaying as she angled downward. Her tusks slid past the dust without scraping him. Her trunk moved along his tiny spine with practiced care. Once, then again. The contact was slow, repetitive, and deliberate, more reassurance than request. Her breath, low and unhurried, rolled across his back in soft clouds of warmth. The herd surrounding them did not move. Their massive bodies remained fixed, forming an unseen boundary that even the wind respected. Not one stepped forward. Not one turned away. They were witnesses, silent, still, and reverent. They were waiting, just as she had been waiting. Not for the end, but for a beginning they hadn't been sure would come. Then something happened. Nothing loud, nothing that would startle an outsider, but among elephants. It was a declaration. The mother lifted her left foot and placed it forward, deliberately crossing the space between her calf and the body of the matriarch who had lain nearby. She didn't pause, She stepped past the older elephant's side and stood between them, not blocking, not claiming, but shielding. It wasn't hierarchy. It wasn't dominance. It was instinct refined through generations of memory. It was protection. She had made her decision. The herd saw it instantly. The lines were redrawn. This was no longer a calf waiting to be assigned. This was her calf. Again, the one she had born hours earlier, whose survival had teetered at the edge of loss, had now been chosen again, not just by blood, but by will, by presence, by the act of standing between him and death itself. She had crossed a line the herd recognized, an old, invisible right understood in silence. The message rippled through them, not in trumpet or cry, but in posture, a slight shifting of feet, a broadening of the circle. The tension that had wrapped the air loosened slightly as if some internal string had been untied. A few meters away, David remained crouched beside the low rise of soil that had been his quiet perch since dawn. His eyes had barely moved in minutes, his chest barely lifted. When he spoke, it was a whisper barely audible through the warm air. "She's taking him." That was all. That was enough. He understood what it meant, that they would not intervene, that the fragile balance had turned. The calf, who only hours ago had looked too weak to even breathe on his own, now had a chance, not just because he was still alive, but because someone had claimed him with the only language elephants have: touch, presence, stillness. The mother moved closer again, brushing flies from his small, sticky eyes. Her trunk swayed with effort. Her breath still labored, but it was measured. Her limbs no longer shook beneath her. Slowly, the others widened their distance, giving her and her calf the space they needed, not out of dismissal, but reverence. A quiet signal had passed through them. It was done. The decision made. The calf would be allowed to live among them. What had once hung by a thread, his heartbeat, his recognition, the mother's own survival, had now become a path, fragile but open. Another low vibration passed through the dirt, not a trumpet, not even a rumble, just the shifting of weight, the subtle realignment of the herd as they recognized the change. A story had closed its loop in the way elephants always seem to know before anyone else does. The older matriarch, whose injury had likely doomed her from the start, seemed almost at peace now beneath the shade of the mother she had brought forward in her final act. There would be no burial, no ritual, just stillness and the quiet acknowledgement that something had passed from one to another. As the day slipped toward dusk, the colors across the plain softened into a muted gold. Shadows lengthened. The heat withdrew from the air, and the first cool breath of evening stirred low across the grass. The mother looked once toward the fading horizon, her ears lifting briefly to catch the last breeze. Then she lowered her head again, stepping once more toward the calf. Not to urge him, not to press him forward, but to remain near. Her body curled slightly to offer shade, and she stood like that, still, breathing, watching. The others didn't move. The wind held, and somewhere within that quiet, a life began. The heat had almost entirely left the earth by the time the newborn found its legs. The last of the sun trailed low across the open plain, casting long shadows that stretched beyond the contours of the herd and across the trampled grasses. The air no longer shimmered with heat, but settled into a stillness broken only by the soft rustling of dry leaves and the occasional shifting of weight from one foot to another. No wind, no cry, just the slow, weighted silence of something passing and something else just beginning. Dust hung faintly in the light, suspended like ash, coloring the scene in tones of amber and bronze. The calf lay nestled near the still body of the elder matriarch, whose chest no longer rose. His tiny ribs fluttered with uneven breaths, and his ears twitched slightly, brushing away insects too persistent to be shooed by the failing light. The mother, who had birthed him, stood close now, her strength no longer distant or uncertain. Something in her posture had changed. subtle but unmistakable. Her head lowered toward the calf, and without sound or signal, her trunk reached out and gently touched his side, brushing him once, then pausing. Her movement was neither tentative nor forceful. It was deliberate, steady, and precise, as though she had made a choice, not from instinct alone, but from something deeper, older. The calf stirred beneath her contact, his legs moving clumsily, still weak from the long, slow entry into life. His body swayed, struggled, and collapsed again. But she did not step back. Instead, she waited, her eyes steady, her breathing even. And then, with one sharp inhale, the calf tried again. His forelegs pushed, unbalanced but determined. His haunches followed, shakier still. Then, with a final surge of effort, he stood, unsteady, unsure, swaying like a sapling in wind, but upright. The entire herd paused, not frozen, but aware. Their trunks shifted slightly, heads turned just enough to see, but no sound broke the moment. Not a single step forward. This space, this breath, belonged to him. He leaned into her, resting his small head against the curve of her foreleg. She stepped once, gently, guiding him not by pressure, but by presence. Slowly, the others began to move, not outward, not away, but around them. A soft crescent began to form, wide enough to hold space, close enough to shield. One by one they passed by the fallen matriarch. Not to mourn openly, there was no keening, no dramatic stillness, but to acknowledge. Each one offered a gesture, a soft touch with the trunk, a lowered head, a slow, respectful step. The language of elephants is written in movement and breath. No rituals, no wails, just space, time, presence. David, who had remained a distant observer, did not follow. He stood back, unmoving, hands loose at his sides, his breath matching the rhythm of the herd as if afraid to disrupt something sacred. He had witnessed many births in the wild, some brutal, others peaceful, but never one marked by such layers of grace and sorrow combined. The risk that had loomed only hours earlier, the threat of orphaning, of abandonment, of death without passage, was still real. The calf was vulnerable. The mother had only just returned to him. The matriarch, whose presence had anchored the group and carried the calf through his earliest minutes, was gone. And yet, what emerged now was not despair, but transition. Not healing, not yet, but continuity. The herd knew what to do. They did not grieve in ways humans would understand. Their strength lay in endurance, in collective silence, in the unspoken act of moving forward without leaving anything behind. The newborn's steps were shallow at first, barely lifts of the feet. His knees buckled, then straightened. Each movement was careful, as if testing whether the ground would remain beneath him. The mother walked at his pace, never overtaking, never stopping entirely, simply adjusting to his rhythm with the quiet precision only time can teach. Her trunk occasionally touched his side, never to steer, only to reassure. Around them, trunks brushed flanks, shoulders nudged gently. Small signs of contact passed between them like ripples in still water. They did not huddle, but they remained close, their mass a wall of life between the calf and whatever else the plain might offer in the coming night. No one led, no one commanded. They followed a rhythm not dictated by hierarchy but by need. The herd moved as one organism, adjusting for the youngest and acknowledging the loss of one of its oldest. As they began to walk again, dust lifted beneath their feet, rising in soft waves that caught the slanting light and hung there, turning every outline golden. Their bodies, dark against the dimming sky, seemed to blur at the edges, as if dusk was slowly folding them into itself. Still no calls, no vocalization, just the sound of footfalls, the hush of grass pressed under wide pads, the whisper of a trunk brushing the side of a sibling's belly. The body of the elder was left behind, but not forgotten. Her memory lingered not in place but in motion, the way the herd shifted slightly, making sure the path forward included space for what had just occurred. The mother paused once, only for a moment, and turned her head back. Her trunk lifted, then dropped, and she continued forward. The calf followed, stepping now with a little more certainty, his knees locking a little faster. David remained still, a respectful shadow against the fading light. He would not follow them beyond the clearing. His presence was no longer required. The wild had taken the moment back, folding it into its own rhythms. As the herd moved across the land, the plain absorbed them slowly. Trees stood as silent witnesses. The last of the wind stirred the tops of tall grasses, bending them gently in the same direction the herd was walking. And far in the distance, where the sky bent low to kiss the horizon, the final color of the day melted from gold to a faint, deep violet. Nothing was spoken. Nothing needed to be. The calf walked, no longer alone. The herd moved, shaped by grief, bound by instinct, led by time, and the plain held its breath as the last shape disappeared into the settling dusk.